Well, welcome. Good afternoon, or for some of you, morning. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Lewis Hopkins. I am the founder and CEO at Securing. I'm joined by Jeff Hare, Donna Curtis, and an additional presenter, Kevin Hare, to take you through our session today, which focuses on Oracle ERP Cloud role design. Okay, and when we say ERP, we also include HCM and so on. But this is really aimed at you organizations that are considering a move to Oracle applications, cloud applications, or perhaps are already there and want to get some ideas on best practices for role design overall. So I'm going to make sure I got my screen shared, and I'll hand over to the team at ERP Risk Advisors for the introduction on their company. As with many of these webinars, obviously we're the presenters, we can talk. If you have any questions, use the Q&A chat facility within the webinar console here, and we'll leave some time at the end for questions. We hope you enjoy the session. Kevin, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon to you on the East Coast. So just a quick introduction to ERP Risk Advisors. I think some of you know us, some of you are getting to know us, but we've been around for more than 20 years. We started out really as an Oracle SI and an Oracle training specialist. And then when SOX was introduced, we transitioned to be a risk advisory firm. So we understand all the issues dealing with SOX and risk and security, and then we also understand the Oracle infrastructure very well. Those are the two main pillars of our company. We have been a risk advisory firm for a long time. Last year, we introduced our first product, ERP Armor. Most of you are aware of that. This year, we expanded that offering into ERP Armor roles, or standard custom roles. We're going to cover today some information on ERP Cloud role design. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll tell you a little bit more about ERP Armor. But we just want to say welcome, everyone. And we're glad you're here. And I hope you get a lot out of the webinar. So back to you, Lewis.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so as I say, my name is Lewis Hopkins. I'm the founder and CEO of Securing. At Securing, we provide technology solutions for applications, specifically HCM applications, around such things as segregation of duties analysis, access controls, configuration controls, looking at the impact that new patches have on your systems. And we have a partnership with ERP Risk Advisors in a combination of technology and services, because we both realize that the two are interlinked and they can't exist without each other. So I don't believe in selling and providing software that does not have the services to back it up, because for many organizations, simply getting reports on what your issue is not enough. And so we work together to bring forward solutions around identifying issues, but also how they can be remediated as well, which is arguably just as, if not more important than the analysis itself, because for many of you, when you get these results, the question we do now. And so we're very much focused on that approach of how do we get organizations compliant and get their security in line with their expectations. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to bring in Donna Curtis. Donna, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. So what the aim of this session is to talk you through some of the ideas around role structure. And Donna's going to take you through some of these ideas, some of the upsides, some of the downsides for your consideration. So Donna, perhaps you could introduce yourself, and then we can start off by going over the structure of security within Oracle Cloud Applications.
Great. Thank you, Lewis. So as you said, my name is Donna Curtis. I work with ERP Risk Advisors. I've been working with Oracle applications for about 23 years, working in the Oracle Cloud aspect arena for about 7 years now, mostly in security, but risk management as well in the Risk Cloud. So I have a great understanding and expertise in the roles, design, and structure. So let me give you a little bit of information about how the roles are structured. They're broken up into, as the screen shows, 3 different areas. Privileges are at the very bottom. A privilege gives you the ability to process, to do something, to edit something, to open something, to create, enable a button to work, to open a form, to process a report. These privileges are grouped together into what we call a duty role. So a duty role is nothing but a group of privileges. A duty role can also have another duty role tied to it. So it can be a group of privileges as well as a group of other duty roles assigned as well. And then a job role is a group of duty roles. So a job role can also contain privileges if you'd like it to, and it does in the seated roles. So you cannot assign a duty role to a user. You can only assign a job role to a user. But a job role can contain, as I said, duty roles and privileges. A duty role can contain other duty roles and privileges, but a privilege is just a privilege. That's the lowest level. So the little picture in the top there, sorry, Louis, kind of gives you an idea of the pink in the center is a duty role, and the purple kind of hexagons around are pictures of what privileges look like. So you can go on. So go ahead, the next slide. Yeah, so privileges are, in this case, this would be a kind of like a duty role of what we're looking at, and it has the privileges on the left give you information about what they do, and then the descriptions show a little bit on the right. This is the a part of a role creation screen where it gives you where you can add and remove different privileges. But a privilege would be like manage bank changes. That gives you the ability to go in and update a bank. There could be an edit privilege. There could be a delete privilege. There could be they do just about anything you need to do, but it's the lowest level that gives you access to do it. So seated roles. I'm going to pass this on to Jeff a little bit because he's going to give you a little bit more information about how the seated roles go.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. So my name is Jeff Hare. I'm the CEO and founder of ERP Risk Advisors, and like Donna, I've been in this space for a little over 20 years, back to late 90s. Implemented as a client on EBS, and then we've been working in the ERP Cloud space for the last several years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the challenges with seated roles and go through some specific examples. Donna's going to talk about, after I'm done, about the concept of seated roles, hybrid roles, and custom roles. So often when we see organizations go live with the applications, there's a large number of users that have access to seated roles. Certainly, we see most IT users supporting the application through seated roles, like application implementation consultant or other implementation type roles. Some other examples of roles would be IT security manager, where user administration is done, setting up users, resetting passwords, assigning roles, making changes to roles, security password policies. And then each of the modules is going to have a series of seated roles related to it, like AP manager and AR manager. So what we predominantly find is that the seated roles are assigned and being used. Often even end users are using these seated roles to be able to do their day-to-day jobs. The challenges we're going to help you identify and understand a little better is what happens as part of the patches. And there's kind of 2 ways you can think about addressing the upgrades. You can use seated roles, and what happens during the patch process, the quarterly patch process or quarterly upgrades, is that Oracle patches against those. So the job role itself may be changed. So like Donna said, there may be privileges at the job role level, or the duty roles associated with those job roles may get some privileges. So there's a variety of places, if you will, where updates can be made that then impacts what users can do. And so as a risk advisory firm, what we recommend is what we call fully customized roles. We want to be able to inoculate roles from upgrades. So our goal is not to stop somebody from doing their job, but to prevent the upgrades from introducing new sensitive access risk, new sensitive data risks, or new segregation of duties that wouldn't be identified as part of the quarterly patching process. And then what would inevitably happen is that somebody would gain access to do something in a privileged manner, like they could override controls. They could, as we're going to see some examples here, upload data, process data that they're not really authorized to do. So some risk examples, just briefly. Implementation roles have the ability to convert data across the board. They're typically being used for hypercare and support. So if we take some examples of implementation roles, application implementation consultant, financial supply chain manufacturing, application administrator, HCM application administrator, and there's many more. So these are the typical roles that are used for the implementation process. And so they have what we consider keys to the kingdom. They have configurations. Sometimes they have the ability to process transactions, but all of them have the ability to upload data as part of a conversions process. So if you can't process data directly through a page, they can still, for example, upload a file of invoices to process, or they can upload POs or approved requisitions. So you may not think that having implementation roles provide full keys to the kingdom access, but they do through either upload process or direct activities. So what we typically would recommend is not having those implementation roles assigned to anybody post-upgrade because of the elevated or privileged access risk, and primarily because the application itself doesn't allow you to do broad look-back procedures. So look-back procedures are an audit concept that we're seeing more of. The guidance came out of requiring look-back procedures came out in 2006 from the PCAOB, and we haven't seen that being forced upon clients in many cases over the last 15 years, but we're seeing it being more of a requirement in some cases from an external audit perspective in certain organizations. Anytime somebody's getting access that's elevated or privileged, highly privileged access that allows them to override controls or do things that they shouldn't do, organizations should be executing look-back procedures to evaluate whether they've done those things. So those implementation roles are certainly good examples of that. So you can go on the next slide as well. So a couple other examples: administer flex fields, which is descriptive flex fields and key flex fields. That's found in many of the day-to-day end user roles and across these modules, just as examples. You can go on the next slide. The ability to maintain some employee attributes. So there's two types of pages that are allowed to maintain employee information. One would be a full a page that you'd see more in the HCM area, like an HR specialist would have the ability to set up an employee, assign salary to them, kick off processes and approvals, convert somebody from a prospect or a applicant to an employee. So kind of a full-blown HCM type of employee management role. There's also another form that allows you to maintain some employee attributes that is more of a role that you would find throughout the application, but not necessarily just an HCM role. So for example, that form or page is contained an internal auditor, sales, some sales roles for setting up like salesman, for example, or making some attributes related to those, the internal auditor role, which shouldn't have it, or some of the suppliers' roles. What that would allow you to maintain are some attributes that most likely or most probably are going to influence workflow design. So the job somebody has, the position somebody has, the department somebody has or is associated with. Those are things that are often used in the workflow design. So who gets access to approve a requisition is going to flow by department, sometimes by job or position, sometimes it's employee supervisor hierarchy. So if you think about all the different workflow processes in your environment, if any of them are dependent upon some of these attributes at the employee level, to the extent that somebody can make a change to those attributes, they change, let's say, their job from let's say they're an HR clerk and they change their job to an HR manager or a VP of HR, or their positions changed or their departments changed, you can see how just having access to that one form is what we would consider a critical sensitive access risk. And that particular page is contained in about 29 seated roles at the last, as of 20A, I think we looked at that. Next slide then, Lewis. So this is an example of the form. So you can actually see the top hand, the personal details, or you can enter last name, first name. You could enter, this is a form that's sometimes used to onboard employees. So if they're not already set up as an employee, you have to enter this detail. The bottom half of the form is really where you're maintaining some of the employment information I mentioned. So the business unit, the job, the grade, the department, the location, and so on, the manager. Okay, next slide. The one thing that we're going to start talking quite a bit about from a risk perspective in the coming days, so we're working on a follow-up webinar to this one and an article related to it, is the ability to upload data from an import process. So the seeded roles, a bunch of seeded roles that are both end user roles and implementation roles, have the ability to upload files. So if you think about background processes that are running to process interface data from other applications, what the interface process is doing that's scheduled and off and running is taking files that are being loaded into the right places, and then it's running those processes through the import, importing that data into the environment. So if you're maintaining supplier interface requisitions, purchase orders, journal entries, anything you can think of, the high-risk master data and transactions, what the system allows a broad number of users to do through 73 different seeded roles is to be able to just upload a file, and that file then would then get picked up by the next time the interface is run. So we're going to talk. Go ahead to the next slide. We're talking about a specific example of this. So you get this slide. The slide prior is just looking at there's 73 roles in its entirety that can upload files. Versus now, then we're going to look at examples specifically about a privilege that can be used to be able to import supplier bank account data. So we always like to look at what we call keys to the kingdom risks in the organization. And that is, what are the privileges somebody can have that would allow them to take over another's accounts, reset passwords, setting up a new user, assign roles to users, maintain roles. You could change the privileges or abilities that a role can do. And then one common fraud risk that we look at is taking over an existing supplier. So you have a large supplier that you're paying on a regular basis, maybe every pay period there's some invoices going on. If I want to commit fraud, all I have to do for that supplier is be able to maintain the bank account to which their ACH payment is being directed. So that's what this is specifically. You can maintain a bank account. Typically, maintain bank account processes done through the forms through like a supplier administrator role. But the system also has the ability to upload a supplier bank account related to an existing supplier. So add a new bank account and make that new bank account the default bank account for the payment process. So we have a video we're going to come out that shows how this is done and executed. But what I want to present to you today is some of our summary findings, which is that ability to upload a file and then run the process to import supplier bank account data and take over the default position, if you will, for a bank account that's contained in 29 seeded roles. Now, part of the challenge we have in releasing information like this is not providing the data for somebody that really wants to commit fraud, the data they need to do that, so that not fully identifying the process. And as we're going to release this video next week, we're really trying to be strategic about how we present the risk without giving, what we call a fraudster the ability to execute that without doing their own research. So we don't name the roles here because we don't want to make it obvious, but certainly if somebody from your organization wants to contact us, we can walk you through this specific example. Matter of fact, we have a free fraud risk assessment going on right now where we'll look at your data within your environment, and we'll evaluate how many people have the keys to the kingdom risks, including this one particular risk here. So it is contained in 29 roles, 5 AP roles. You can almost guess that, what roles they're in the AP side. The employee role has that ability. So essentially all employees in your organization have the ability to commit what we would consider material fraud through the seated employee role if you're using the seated employee role, which we would never recommend using the seated employee role because of things like this. There's a bunch of privileges that really should be pulled out of the seated employee role. So we always build a custom employee role for organizations where we're building security. You'd expect this type of activity in the SCM roles, which there's 10 of them. That's partly what SCM roles do, or some of the implementation roles. You wouldn't expect it in the HCM roles, or 6 of those, or the tax, there's 3 tax roles, or you certainly wouldn't want the AP role to have access to this. Go ahead, Louis. So in summary, there's a lot of risks with seated roles, and Donna's going to now talk about the way that roles can be customized and the concept of hybrid roles and then fully custom roles, and kind of reiterate why we prefer what we call fully customized roles as part of our role design.
Thanks, Jeff. So as he mentioned, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of risk associated with using seated roles. Gives you a lot of reasons why we recommend and we prefer that you would look into customizing your roles. There's a lot of SIs that don't recommend customizing your roles because they believe you're going to lose functionality, you're going to lose the ability to do some of the new processes that come out, and so therefore they don't recommend it. Part of that is because they don't know how to customize the roles properly. And so a lot of them do what we call hybrid roles. What a hybrid role is if you look at the picture, we have a seated role on the left, and that is a regular duty role that has basic privileges. This is a seated role, looks exactly like the system came with. A customized role would where you take the duty role, you customize it by removing a privilege that you want. So if this were associated to a job role, you would have one seated role and one custom role. They do this so that if we're not making any changes to the duty role that we're keeping seated, there's no need to customize it if we're leaving it as it is. So therefore, if the job role we want to create has 5 duty roles in it, and we're only making changes to a couple of them, we only need to customize the couple that we're changing. We can leave the other seated duty roles as they are and make no changes to them. So therefore, we have a customized job role because we have to give it a new name. We've got a couple custom duty roles within it that we've changed and updated privileges with, and we have a couple seated duty roles in there that we have made no changes to. We therefore call that a hybrid role. It's part custom, part seated. When that happens, there's some issues associated with that when it comes to patching. If you go to the next slide, please. So when patches come, which they will, because you don't really have a lot of choice when it comes to patching and upgrades, Oracle gives you a specific amount of time and that you can push off an upgrade or a patch, but at some point you absolutely have to take it. You don't have a choice. You can get it into your test environments 2 weeks prior to your production environment. So you do have the opportunity to do some testing and validate, look at some of the functionality, see if you like it, if it works. But if you don't have the time to do that testing, it goes into prod. Whether you are prepared for it or not, you will get what it has. If you have hybrid roles, what happens is a custom duty role does not get updated or changed or anything associated with the upgrade or the patch. It is kind of ignored because it's custom. The system does not see it, just kind of leaves it alone. The seated duty roles, on the other hand, will get updated if there's been a change made to that duty role. So if Oracle has decided that there is a job role that they are making an update to, and by updating that job role, they are updating the duty roles within that job role, they're going to look for specific seated duty roles to make the changes to. They don't care what job role it's in, they're making changes to seated duty roles. So if you happen to have a couple of those in your custom job role that you've created, they will make changes to those seated duty roles within. So you could have either privileges removed. That could be part of the upgrade. You could have privileges added. So functionality could change. When this happens, there's always the possibility that your job role will no longer work properly. They will have removed functionality you were expecting to use. They could have added functionality, partial functionality that gives your user now access to a form or a button that is supposed to be able to be utilized, but when they try to access that, it doesn't work properly or causes a problem somewhere else because you only received a partial piece of the functionality, because you didn't have all of the pieces, all of the seated duty roles, all of the process available to be added in. You only had a partial piece. So we have a lot of problems with what people say, my custom role broke. Well, chances are that custom role was not fully custom. It was partially customized. So we recommend what we call a fully customized role. So if you continue on, what we call a fully customized role is a role that is copied all the way through. So every duty role within that role has been customized in that it has a new name and a new code. Whether you make a change to the privileges or not, whether you leave it identically exactly the way it was and all you're doing is making a change to the name and a copy, change the name and save it, that's what everything has to be changed. And therefore, every duty role within your job role is then considered custom. When a patch comes along, it's going to totally ignore everything within that job role, and you don't have to worry about it. It does not get updated. It doesn't get changed. You then have the ability, when you're ready, to go into the test instance during your 2-week time frame, or even afterwards, because it didn't affect your roles that you have currently, to test that new functionality, determine if you like it, does it work for your company, how do you want it to work, and then to determine exactly which role, which users are supposed to get that functionality, so you ensure the right people have access to it, and you add it to those custom roles as need be when you're ready and when you've trained people properly on how to utilize that functionality. So you're not losing any functionality. You're not losing the ability to keep up with what Oracle's giving you on a regular basis. You're just having the ability to look at it in your time frame, the way you choose to, and put it where you want it, not where Oracle decides to put it. We've also seen their patches remove functionality. And if this is a function you're currently using and you want to keep, they grandfather everything. They don't ever remove it 100% and delete it, but they will remove it from a seated role where you won't have that functionality anymore. But if it's in a custom role, you continue to keep that functionality and it won't go away. So you don't have to worry about losing functionality you're currently using as well. So that's a positive. So if we look at some of the downsides to custom roles, the creation can be a slow and labor-intensive process, because in order to do it properly, you want to ensure the roles you're creating do exactly what your company needs them to do, that they work the way you expect them to. We like the idea of one role per job, and not as in an AP clerk role, an AP payment role, that type of thing. But if you have a person who deals with payments and invoices, and they do some work in the inventory, and they do some work in, and they view some general ledger information, and they view some inventory information, we want all those pieces of all the different modules that they touch in one role to give that person the ability to do their entire job in one area. Gives you the ability to look for SODs, segregation of duties problems, ensuring that you've got all of the risks enabled or handled and looked at visibly easier for one area. So you have all of that in one role. So that can be a little bit time consuming, depending upon how you look at it. And in some cases, it can be costly. There are some SIs that we have talked to, or companies that we've talked to that have had SIs that charge an extremely large amount of money to do this. So that turns some people off for the ability to use custom roles because of the cost. It does not have to be, that labor intensive or costly. And so I'm going to pass that on to Kevin to discuss a little bit about how we look at this process.
Thanks, Donna. I mentioned earlier that last year we introduced ERP Armor, And really what we introduced last year was what we call ERP Armor rules. And this year, we introduced a second product in the portfolio called ERP Armor roles. So the idea here is that ERP Armor isn't a product, not only a product, but it's also an architecture. You know, the two things that are unique to ERP Armor is, number one, we take a security first, compliance second approach. What does that mean? That means we look at sensitive access first, and then apply the appropriate segregation of duties rules second. This is unique. We have a huge sensitive access library. For those of you that have worked with us, you're aware of that. But really the end result here is that we not only will resolve all the compliance issues that you're facing, but we'll give you quite a bit of fraud protection along the way. So the first architectural issue is security first, compliance second. The second thing is really around change management. We separate transactions and configurations. For those of you who have heard Jeff speak, you know he's very passionate about change management. All people that do transactions shouldn't do configurations, and vice versa. And all configuration changes should go through the change management process and link up to the governance structure. And even though that's logical, and in theory we all would agree with that approach, the reality is most companies aren't doing that right now. So ERP Armor rules and ERP Armor roles both factor both of those things into our approach. So I just want to point that out. So ERP Armor roles is something that we've been doing it forever. Really what we've done is formalized for ERP Cloud what we called standard custom roles. So we're going to come to you with roles that are proven, that we've used at many other clients, and we're going to start from those standard custom roles and begin the design process to see if they'd work for you and make changes from there. So that's the idea of ERP Armor roles. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we are going to be coming out with some new offers in and around ERP Armor. So in a couple of weeks, you're going to see an announcement for us where we're going to introduce what we call ERP Armor reports. So internal auditors and external auditors both have the need to get access to detailed information in the Oracle environment and interpret it and then take some action on it. So this is a real struggle for internal auditors and some external auditors. So we have been working in this area for a long time, providing these services to our clients. So we're going to come up with a standard set of offers in the area of reporting, and so stay tuned for that. I think that's all I wanted to cover in terms of ERP Armor. ERP Armor is really easy to learn about. If you go to our website at erpra.net, you'll see on the front page we talk about our processes, and then on the upper title bar there's a link for ERP Armor, and if you link there you can learn all about ERP Armor, including downloading the data sheets for ERP Armor rules and ERP Armor roles, and also the data sheet for what we call ERP Armor as a service. So I think we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. So Lewis, I'm going to turn this back to you for some questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kevin. Sorry, I just had to stop the screen share there. I'm also going to put up a poll because it'd be great to get some feedback from you as the audience about where you stand with your plans for cloud applications. So we do appreciate you taking the time to answer this. So there is a poll up. What are your cloud applications plans? Already live on Cloud ERP HCM. Currently implementing cloud applications. We plan to start implementing in the next 12 months, or we just have no plans to go to cloud applications. In the meantime, I will bring up some questions we have here. Somebody else, where is the ERP Risk Advisors library of SODs and sensitive data coming from? So I guess, how did you guys put it together?
So I'll take that question. This is Jeff. So it's really been something we've worked on since the beginning of the SOX era. So the ERP Cloud library kind of architecturally stems from the work we've been doing with EBS for a long time. So kind of the basic functionality of all financial supply chain and HCM applications. We had rules for EBS, so basically then had to map those into ERP Cloud privileges. And then, of course, there's definitely some differences between ERP Cloud and EBS. So the net result is we built some new rules that are more specific, or we made some changes to rules that are more specific to ERP Cloud. So our overall architecture, I guess, in terms of how we approach role design, has been pretty consistent from EBS to ERP Cloud. And then, of course, we always listen to our customers. So that's a standard way we learn about what's going on in customers' environments, what applications are using. A lot of it really stems from the details of what privileges, for example, map to which risks, stem from the extensive experience Donna's had at building custom roles in the last, I don't know how long it's been, Donna, about 5 or 6 years. As she's worked in the ERP Cloud space, she's been around for a long time building roles. So, like, for example, filtering out the page ability, the entrance into the page, which is, if you include that as part of your sensitive access or SOD risk, that can be identified as a false positive because the page ability in itself doesn't give you the ability to update transactions or master data. So what really makes our library unique isn't just that we've speculated on a bunch of privileges that belong to risks, but that we combine that information with building roles and the knowledge we've learned over, and Don and I have been in this space for 20 plus years. So it's kind of a collaboration of all that work for during that time frame. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hey, Jeff, I would add one thing. We take what I would call a community approach to developing our rule set. As part of ERP Armor, we offer to our clients that we'll build any rules that you need at no additional cost. So, and then what we do is the reciprocal part of that is those rules come into our library, and through our quarterly updates, we're pushing those rules out to all of our customer base, and it's available to all of our customer base. So the idea there is as maybe in Q2, client A learns of a specific risk, we put a rule in our library to detect that risk, and then it gets put into our library, and in Q3 we roll that out to some customers, go over the new rules, and lo and behold, the customer has a need for that rule, and it's already developed. So we take a community-based approach. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah,
and that's a good point, Kevin. I mean, I'm glad you made that point. I think we do take the community-based approach not only in the context of ERP Armor rules in terms of what SOD and sensitive access rules are out there, but we also do the same in ERP Armor roles. We learn from customers of how they're doing things perhaps that we haven't seen done before, that maybe is a better way of building custom roles. So breaking down something a little differently than we have before. And that's part of our role subscription, as well as coming back and say, okay, like IT Security Manager is a perfect example. We've been doing this for a while, but we break apart IT Security Manager into 2 roles, a user provisioning role that you can give somebody from a help desk perspective that has a day-to-day process of maintaining users and assigning roles to them, but they shouldn't be doing any security changes or password profiles or other things that are in IT Security Manager. So that's things that we learn over time. I mean, that's something we've had in our portfolio for a long time, but we do listen to customers and see what they've done, and then all of our other customers get the benefit of those interactions. One other comment I was going to make, just to put this in context, I just looked at the 20A upgrade file, so between 19D and 20A, and I had looked at it from this perspective. I just wanted to provide you some rough numbers. There are 247 privileges added to one or more seated roles, and there's 126 seated roles impacted by either privileges being added or privileges being removed. So you can, if you think about that, I mean, not that every organization is running all 126 seated roles or needs to evaluate all 247 privileges that are being added. They may be in applications you're not using, or maybe in seated roles that aren't being used. But you really should have a process in place each quarter to identify those changes. And whether you're using fully seated roles, hybrid roles, or fully custom roles, there should be a process that evaluates what the impact of those patches is. So we can certainly help that. We do have a ERP Armor as a service offering in that space, and we can certainly talk to you about that if that's of interest to you.
One more thing I'd point out is on our website and our data sheet, we actually list the number of rules that we support, over 1,200 for EBS and over 340 for ERP Cloud. If you'd like to actually see what those rules are and get a feel for the type of rules, we openly share that. So we can jump on a Zoom session and share with you the categories of rules and explain to you a little more about how we've developed those rules. The other thing that kind of came to mind, Jeff, is that as part of ERP as a service, we have a service called Patch Impact Analysis that Jeff just referred to, where we look at the security changes from Oracle patch to patch, advise our clients of the changes they need to make. So we take a community approach there, not only with our client base around ERP Cloud, but we have an alliance with one of the big four consulting partners where they're equally concerned about the impact of those changes that are being brought through the quarterly patches. So we're actively sharing not only with our clients but with others in the industry, and the idea is we want to learn as much as we can to help our clients. So just want to point that out as well.
Yeah, we're gonna get some interesting questions and discussion on the chat. I'll just address a couple of these. So we're talking about the ERP Cloud, which obviously doesn't allow customization of the objects or the privileges. When I talk about EBS, EBS does, of course, support custom functions versus ERP Cloud. You can't customize privileges. So you're dealt with whatever are available. And the term customize can be confusing. I think Fetty makes a good point. Ivan makes a good point on this, which is what we're essentially doing is configuring the roles. So we're taking a seated role and we're modifying that to be custom, but Oracle still fully supports that. So, for example, if there's an issue with how we've built the role, taking out a duty role, a privilege out of a seated duty role, make it a custom duty role, and we can't figure out why something's not working, then you can log an SR for that. So they're customizable or configurable. That Oracle still supports that. So Albert asked the question, how do you make sure custom roles do not have embedded SOD issues? So that's really what we do well, is we provide an architecture to be able to build custom roles, and as part of what we call Role Design Studio, so our own internal process of building and maintaining these custom roles. This is something that Securing supports us with. So so when we build a custom role, we can export that out of a client's environment, import that into Securing's Role Design Studio, modify that role, and then redeploy that role in a customer's environment. This is how we build our custom role library, is by taking the roles that we built and then be able to manipulate those and then push those into other clients' environments. We've kind of solved the issue of how you can do that. So Albert, I would say the easy answer is it's very difficult to do without an SOD engine. And what we recommend to customers going through the role design / redesign process is you don't necessarily dive in and buy a tool. You could, if you have a tool to be able to test against those, we can certainly use whatever you have. We are what we call Word Switzerland. We're agnostic to what partners you want to go with. On the other hand, we do provide a service to be able to do that. And so as part of our role design process, we can role design or ERP Armor roles. We can walk you through how we're evaluating SOD issues, and we're doing that through our own ERP Armor rules library. And that's very much an art that I think we can do well, that we can do better than everybody else, just because this is what we focus on. And like Kevin said, there's a lot of advantages to the approach that we take in building our SOD library. You ask, is there a list of known Oracle standard roles SOT gaps? We can provide some of that to you because we do track some of the challenges we have with seated roles and the SOT risk associated with it. What I really want to challenge you on, and this is a question we get consistently from organizations, is what are the SOT gaps? And as Kevin mentioned, when we build our library, ERP Armor rules, we take a sensitive access risk first and an SOD risk approach second. And why do we do that? So, for example, if we were looking at SOD alone, we may look for, does the employee role have the ability to enter a supplier and enter an AP invoice or enter a purchase order? Of course, the employee role is not going to have access to that, right? So employee role, you think is just basically, it's an abstract role that has the basic functions needed for all employees. But because we take a sensitive access risk first, what we're looking for is what privileges in the seated employee role don't belong there that we wouldn't want all employees to have access to. And there are some. So our approach to looking at role design is we're going to look at sensitive access risk. We're looking at who has the ability to upload supplier data or maintain a supplier bank account, add a supplier bank account, like we're going to go through in our next webinar. We're going to look to make sure that as we look at the critical and high risk sensitive access privileges, that they're in the right roles. And if they're not in the right roles, we find them in roles that we don't think they should be in, then we have to customize those roles. So this is a much different approach than most external audit firms. Most external audit firms are looking at it from a compliance perspective first, and I would say they overemphasize or wrongly prioritize SOD risks versus sensitive access risk. You can't really evaluate role design and look at not only issues within the roles, but access across roles. You can't really look at that without looking at sensitive access risk and SOD risks combined. So you asked the follow-up question: how do we demonstrate to auditors that Oracle roles do not have SOD issues based upon evidence data extracts? Well, so in terms of prioritizing, and it really comes down to the question: are you talking about a SOX audit or a non-SOX audit? So if you're talking about a SOX audit, what we do is we help prioritize the SOD and sensitive access risk based upon what we would consider your in-scope SOX controls. So it's a different question altogether of how we address external auditors, depending upon whether you're privately held or publicly subject to SOX requirements. So on the SOX audit side, what we do is we take a risk and control matrix and we look at everything that is an in-scope control that has an IT application control or an IT dependent control related to that. And Kevin mentioned earlier that I'm really passionate about one topic, which is making sure that you can rely upon your application controls. Okay. So in order to rely upon your application controls, we argue strongly that nobody should have the ability to enter the transaction and maintain the configuration related to that application control. So if they have the ability to update a configuration where a IT application control is dependent upon the configuration, then effectively they can change the configuration and override the control. Let me go back to my example earlier, which is the ability to maintain the employee record or portions of the employee record. Okay, so if I am a buyer, or let's just say I'm a buyer, okay, and the approval limit for buyers is set at the job level or position level. So a job, let's say a position of procurement agent versus a procurement manager have different levels. So if I, as a buyer, can change my job from buyer to purchasing manager, I've just given myself the ability to go from a $10,000 approval limit to a $100,000 approval limit. So I, as a buyer, I'm changing the intention of the control design. So we have a significant amount of SOD conflicts that is trying to evaluate whether or not somebody with the data transaction ability has the ability to override the control design through configurations. In some cases, you can do that through master data. So we would first start with demonstrating the auditors. We would first start with painting a picture of why certain SOD and sensitive access risks are a priority over other ones. So, for example, if somebody has the ability to, let's say, enter AP invoices. One second. Sorry, I had a little cough in my throat there. So if they had the ability to enter AP invoices, and let's say they had the ability to enter suppliers and enter AP invoices as an example of an SOD risk. But the way the system was designed, all suppliers go through an approval process and all invoices go through an approval process. And and you couldn't override that, which really isn't the case in most environments because of the ability to upload suppliers and upload invoices. But how we would map those risks is we wouldn't look at enter suppliers and enter PO or enter invoices as a SOD risk, because those are fully mitigated through the implementation of an application control. You could have somebody that did both, and if they were to enter a supplier, it would kick off the supplier approval process, or if they were to maintain a supplier, make an update, that would go through the supplier approval process. So same thing with invoices. The enter supplier invoice is going to go through, has to be approved by somebody other than them, or has to be matched to PO. So part of how we evaluate which SOD conflicts and which sensitive access risks are relevant is reviewing how you define workflows. So you could, for example, allow a buyer to approve their own PO within a certain dollar limit. We need to understand that, because that's part of the risk profile for the ability to enter POs. But we're ultimately trying to segregate the transactions versus configurations. Long answer, a lot of the challenges we find organizations is they can't effectively argue what SOD and sensitive access risk should be in scope, and so their external auditors just beat them up. Really, they over test SOD and sensitive access risk, and now you're playing what we call audit whack-a-mole. You're trying to, instead of defining what your position is, management's control over this, and then limiting what the external auditors should be testing. Once you've had that agreement on what the in-scope SOD and sensitive access risks are, the external auditors come in and they run a full rule set, and you're stuck with justifying why somebody has enter customers and enter orders when you have proper mitigating controls related to those. So that's a long answer, but it required kind of a complex answer, kind of given what we see are challenges with most organizations.
I just add one thing, Jeff. There's times an external auditor comes in and they're asking about something that's really should be out of scope, or it's not relevant. So we help our clients argue back that what they're asking for, looking at, is not relevant. But sometimes what happens is the external auditors, they have a superior tool that can analyze your system than you have yourself. And they legitimately will find things that you are unaware of, and these things are relevant and they need to be corrected. Our objective with ERP Armor is that our analytical tool is a superset of the auditor's tool, not a subset. So if we go through a scan, we're going to be able to see everything the audit community is going to see and address everything the audit community is going to see, and we do it proactively. So that's the big idea of ERP Armor, is that we have a superset of the best analytics to at least make you aware of what the possible risks are before your audit starts and your audit brings it to your attention. So that's another way to say what Jeff said, but that's a huge objective, and our community-based approach, I think it makes that very effective. Did we capture all the questions, Jeff?
So I think Donna had a comment she wanted to make about custom roles.
Well, I just had an example. They were asking about configured or custom roles being supported by Oracle support. And I was just going to say they do totally support the configured or custom roles. I have a current client that I'm working with. It's an HR role design, but we had a problem with one of the roles not working properly, and we couldn't seem to figure out exactly what was the cause of why it wouldn't work properly. So we took it to support, created an SR for it, and they worked with us through a couple OWC instances, and come to find out it wasn't a problem with the role or a problem with it was a bug that we found in the system of why it wasn't working properly. The last patch caused a bug for them. So we were able to find the bug. Unfortunately, we can't fix the role at the moment until the bug is fixed, but they did totally work with us to try to help us. And they've had that happen a couple different times when there have been issues. And even though the users are using configured roles, they don't have a problem with that. They sometimes have us add a seated role in a test environment just to validate that the process is broken due to the system and not the role. But that usually is easily determined once we go through the process. But they totally support and will help us out if we're looking for something specific as to how to make something work that we couldn't figure it out before. So they've been very helpful all the way around. That's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I know there's a couple questions that keep coming in from Albert, and we can certainly have a sidebar conversation with you on more detail. But we're needless to say, we are specialists and experts at helping respond to external audit issues. That's part of what we provide as part of our EP Armor as it relates to the rules. So there's no support for questions related to rules, why they're built, and the results that come from using our rules as part of an SOT or sensitive access analysis. We also can provide, as I mentioned, our own service for that, which is what we normally recommend as a starting point when you are in, I would call the whack-a-mole phase, where we have lots of issues that need to be dealt with, and you're trying to customize roles. And then we offer some more advanced support, if you will, as part of ERP Armor as a service, which would be mapping things from your RCM to in-scope and SOT rules, and then helping from an audit support perspective on that perspective. So in that case, so I think we've addressed the questions for the most part. I'll turn it back over to Lewis.
Yeah, it draws us up to the hour, and thank you everyone for taking part in the poll. I do appreciate it. It's given us some good insight. We've left an email up on screen. You can also find us on LinkedIn under ERP Risk Advisors and Securing with 2 E's. So we do thank you very much for attending, and any further questions, drop us a line. We can make things like slides available to you after. If you want to have a further discussion about your requirements on role design, then again, get into. But thanks to everybody for attending. Thanks to Jeff, Kevin, and Donna for helping to present this session. We hope you found it useful, and we also hope you all stay safe. And thank you very much again for attending.
Thank you, Lewis.
Yeah.